he had no children. He left the entire empire of Macedonia and Greece to his 4 generals. Now, 2 of them became sort of irrelevant very quickly. Okay, Lysimachus, he got control of Greece and Macedonia, that area. Okay, that's all he got, and he was cool with that. He had no aspirations of grandeur. He was okay. Greece, Macedonia, I'm good with that. Okay, Cassander, he got what we now know as Turkey, and he was good with that. Okay, so we're going to sort of let those 2 folks go, because they sort of are not part of the story anymore, and they lived sort of happily ever after. But Seleucus and Ptolemy, okay, these guys had some thoughts in their head that they're going to do what Alexander did. Okay, Ptolemy got northern Africa and Egypt, that area. Okay, and Israel. Seleucus got Syria and Babylon, that whole northeastern area. Neither one of them were satisfied with what they ended up with. That's where we start getting interesting. See, Ptolemy, who had control over Israel, was good to the Jews. You know, he let them do what they wanted to do. He was favorable. And all these, you know, all the Jews, it was a time of prosperity, but Seleucus couldn't stand it. Okay? He ends up fighting Ptolemy. Now, these guys were like the best of friends during Alexander's reign. They fought together. They took all this land, and now they're at each other's throats. Eventually, Seleucus does take control of Israel from Ptolemy, and things change in the land. See, Seleucus wasn't very favorable towards the Jewish people. Okay? Come to power, Antiochus Epiphanes. Antiochus Epiphanes was a descendant of Seleucus. Okay? He was the most ruthless of all the Seleucid leaders. And things changed in Israel. This was the time when the Jewish people were no longer allowed to read the Torah. They were no longer allowed to celebrate or practice any of their Jewish things. This is the time when the story of the dreidel comes about. Because they would get together and they would be reading the Torah or talking about the Torah, because they weren't allowed to have a Torah. They would be talking about it and just studying it, you know, through word of mouth. And the soldiers would come by, and they couldn't be seen talking about it, so they would have these little tops, these little toys, and they would spin the dreidels so that the soldiers would think they're just playing a little game. Until the soldiers would walk by and be out of sight, they'd pack up the little dreidels, like their marbles, they put them in their pocket until they come around again, and they would continue talking about the Torah. That's where the dreidel came from. Okay? So this was a great horrendous period of time in the life of Israel. Okay? But it was predicted. It was predicted. Let's go back to Daniel chapter 11, verses 3 and 4. Daniel chapter 11, verses 3 and 4 talk about a leader who would be a great leader. He would come off the scene, and everything that he had built would be divided into 4. This is talking about Alexander the Great. Alexander, and it's prophesied all the way back in Daniel. Now, living in Modi'in at the time of Antiochus Epiphanes was a family. Their last name was that's what most people would think. No, their last name was Hasmoneus. That's where we get the term Hasmonean from. The Hasmonean Empire is what happened after the events of Hannukah, as those children of Mattathias, Hasmoneus, came to power. Okay? Mattathias was a priest. Now, he was serving in the temple one day when one of the Syrians come by and ask him to sacrifice something unclean on the altar. He refused, but there was another Jew who was hanging out and he said, "Hey, I'll do it." Mattathias takes the spear from the Syrian soldier. Okay, overpowers the Syrian soldier, takes the Syrian soldier's very own spear and runs it through the Jew who offered to sacrifice defiled on the altar. Pulls the spear out, goes back, kills the soldier. This created a furor amongst the Jewish people. They say, "Hey, now's the time to revolt." And so Mattathias and his 5 sons, along with about 700 other people, form this band. And they become one of the first guerrilla fighters. Okay? They would go and they would strike here and disappear into the caves. They learned the caves really well. They would go over here and they would strike here in the caves and then disappear back into the caves. Okay? And working like this for 3 whole years, they finally recapture the temple and rededicate it. Now, let's take a quick look at 2 Chronicles chapter 7, verses 8 through 10. 2 Chronicles Yeah, I'm going the wrong way. Second Chronicles chapter 7, verses 8 through 10. At that time, Solomon kept the feast 7 days, and all Israel with him, a very great assembly from the entrance of Hamath to the brook of Egypt. And on the 8th day, they held a sacred assembly, for they observed the dedication of the altar 7 days, and the feast 7 days. On the 23rd day of the 7th month, he sent the people away to their tents. Now, if you subtract 8 days from the 23rd day of the 7th month, what do you get? All right, come on, people. All right, you can't all be English, science, social studies, folks. You got to be one math and science guy. 23 minus 8. 15. 23 minus 8 is 15. I don't care what language you're speaking it in. Okay? Anyone know what the 15th day of the 7th month is? No. The 15th day of the 7th month. The first day of the 7th month is Yom Teruah. The 10th day of the 7th month is Yom HaKippurim. The 15th day of the 7th month is Tabernacles. That was the day they dedicated the Temple of Solomon on Sukkot. Okay? Keep that in your minds, because when the Hasmoneans captured the temple back from the Syrians, they're celebrating Sukkot. They're dedicating the temple. It was the birthday. That's right. The Tabernacles, the 15th of Tishrei was Yeshua's birthday. That's right. They weren't celebrating that, though, because he hadn't come yet. But, and I'm not going to go into all these details, remember when we studied the lineage of Messiah's birth, it is very, very likely that the day of his conception was the 25th day of the month of Kislev, which is the first day of Hannukah, which is the day that they rededicated the temple after they had captured it again. You know, you can't orchestrate something like that unless you're God. That's just too much stuff to try and juggle. Okay? And it's perfect. It's perfect. On the 25th day of Kislev, Messiah, in several, about 150 years later would be conceived. But the dedication came. The light of the menorah was lit on that day in the dedication of that temple. It's incredible stuff. It's incredible. So that's what they did. And they celebrated the 8-day festival of Sukkot. We have the legend of the oil. But there's more to come. And you have to get the rest of this story. Okay? Because this is how we end up getting to the first century in Israel. Okay? Mattathias was the leader. He dies fairly early on. Okay? His oldest son, Simon, didn't take control. Okay? His middle son, Judah, took control. Judah takes over and becomes the first Hasmonean leader. Okay? And he rules, okay. He gets killed in a revolt against Syria. See, they recaptured the temple, but remember, Syria is still in charge. Okay? Syria is still in charge. Judah sets up almost as a vassal state to Syria in Israel. And so he's the almost de facto governor. He dies in a revolt against Syria, and Jonathan takes control. Now, Jonathan starts making political alignments. Okay? And now we're starting to get into political intrigue. I've never been a political guy, but when you start to talk about political intrigue, like that movie No Way Out with Kevin Costner, you remember that movie? And Gene Hackman?